This girl is Saki, an S-rank adventurer. So why is she running away from the boss fight? And why is the trash bag kid the one staying behind to face it? Yeah, the same kid who a week ago couldn't even hold a sword right. See, the worthless loser of the time is Yuki. Bro's whole job in his squad was carrying the bags, healing potions, snacks, the literal trash bag. The mage of the team treated him like a waiter. The leader treated him like dead weight. Saki was the only one who defended him because they grew up together in an orphanage that got wiped out by a dungeon collapse. Now fast forward to a few days ago. The squad walks into an S-rank dungeon and the floor straight up swallows them. Teleport trap. They get dropped right in the boss room. A butler-looking old man rises out of a pool of blood and folds the entire S-rank squad like laundry. Then the real boss walks out, a vampire and the demon king of the dungeon. Every monster in the room kneels. The leader instantly knows his whole team is about to die. That's when the trash bag kid pulls out the team's emergency teleport device. Press the button. The whole squad goes home. Catch anyone outside the radius stays behind. So our boy starts walking the wrong way. The mage screams at him. Saki sobs. The leader scoops her up because he understood the message, and bro keeps walking, knowing he just signed his death certificate. Countdown hits 0, and he tosses the teleport behind. That way the team vanishes, but he's alone with a room full of demons that just embarrassed an S-rank party. But instead of killing him, the vampire is impressed with the loyalty of the boy, sacrificing himself to save everyone while being a worthless jobless loser, which is perfect for him because see, they need a literal jobless person to make a certain job. Turns out the monsters aren't the bad guys. Humans walk into dungeons every week and farm them like ATMs. The Demon King wants to take down other dungeons to absorb their mana and protect his own crew. But to do that, he needs a human partner who can summon him out into the world. The requirement is 0 job affiliation and some who seems loyal. So yeah, bro has to be unemployed. So the demon tells our boy that with the power he will gain, he will be able to protect his allies and help the dungeon. Both sides win. Basically, bro got recruited as a Demon King's partner because his resume is lacking. He shakes the vampire's hand. A curse mark burns into his skin, and just like that, the worst adventurer in the guild becomes the most dangerous monster in there. He wakes up on the surface. Saki tackles him crying, and the next day, bro walks straight to the guild like nothing happened, asking for permission to clear a dungeon solo. The receptionist looks at him like he just confessed to a crime, but she ends up clearing him for the easiest beginner dungeon they have, F-rank Silent Labyrinth. Few weak monsters reported. The kind of place a rookie goes to die without making the news. They explain he can press the red button if he needs anything. All of a sudden, the big vampire guy asks if this is an abandoned dungeon. Shocked, the kid asks if that's the Demon King's ability. But the man explains it's actually the kid's ability so he can communicate with monsters. That kind of ability is called an always-on or automatic skill. Yuki explains that an abandoned dungeon is one that isn't being managed or cleaned properly. A dungeon with lots of resources gets tons of adventurers trying to make money, so it's kept in good shape. Watching from a distance, the vampire comments that the monsters in this dungeon are reproducing peacefully. He figures the dungeon would eventually collapse because it can't handle that many monsters. That's what should happen, but the hero notices there aren't any monsters there at all. He realizes that's seriously weird even for a weak dungeon. Then the whole place starts shaking hard. A pair of adventurers comes running, yelling that the dungeon boss has shown up. Freaked out, Yuki asks what this giant slime is that's coming straight at him. The Demon King explains that the few monsters in this dungeon have been devouring each other. Then the protagonist spots an exit and points it out. The three of them start running from the monster. At that moment, the girl gets grabbed by the slime and dragged away. Desperate, the hero asks the demon if he can do anything if he gets summoned. But the answer is no. Seeing the girl losing strength, the protagonist makes a move and charges the monster. He throws himself right into the gooey slime. Seeing that, the vampire starts laughing his head off. He says the kid will do whatever it takes to save her. With the girl in his arms, Yuki summons the Demon King. The big vampire appears and says his master can use him however he wants. Injured, the young guy starts coughing up strawberry juice and feels like his insides are burning. That's when the demon gives the hero his power. The kid uses the attack Chaotic Wolf Dawn and fires it at the monster, completely destroying it. Stunned, the protagonist realizes that wasn't really an attack. It was more like a full-on disaster. After the monster is defeated, one of the adventurers notices the kid is hurt and says they need to get him out of there fast. Yuki even tries to argue that he's fine, but he passes out and collapses on the ground. A few days pass after the dungeon incident. The kid gets a card showing he's been promoted to rank E. He remembers that Duo saved him. They even filed his report and carried him out of the dungeon. With a glass of wine in his hand, the vampire asks why the kid looks so down and says this calls for a celebration. But the hero disagrees, saying all he did was summon him. The demon disagrees and says that was all the kid could do. He says that in that moment, the kid refused to abandon that girl and saved her without hesitating. Offering him wine, the vampire says he likes that strength in him. But he also says it's a problem if the kid is always one step from death, and that next time he should summon someone else. That someone would be Elvina, an undead from the servant race. Nervous, the young guy introduces himself and says it's nice to meet her. So the girl says the young master is charming, but love at first sight is kinda too much. With a cold but captivating look, she says there's no heartbeat, because she's undead. Shocked, the kid asks if that's normal, and the vampire says yeah. But Elvina explains it was just an undead joke, and says her goal is to be an affordable maid. She mentions the boy needs to level up if he wants to resist being summoned by her lord. Sometime later, the zombie shows the young guy how strong she is, and he's impressed. She manages to clear an E-rank dungeon called Nest of the Blazing Ones. Watching how she acts, the hero remembers the kids from the orphanage, which makes him happy. But then he notices his levels won't stop going up and asks if there's anything he can do about it. Hearing that, the maid gets confused because he's complaining about leveling up and asks if that's some kind of living people joke. A few minutes later, the protagonist asks if he can keep her summoned longer compared to the Demon King. The zombie explains the mana needed to summon him is massive. On the other hand, she says she's a cheap household maid and can be summoned with the young guy's mana. Smiling, the protagonist tells her she's a huge help, which makes her embarrassed. That's when Yuki realizes it's not just about raw power. Summons need to be mana efficient too. Not long after, they reach the boss room, and the young guy says the place looks pretty scary. But the maid throws a solid punch and straight up breaks the entire gate. After that, she says you should always knock before entering a room. Seeing the girl, the knight gets ready to fight. Charging in, the maid tells her opponent to become an offering. From a distance, the hero notices the fire on the knight's sword is totally different from anything he's seen so far. Worried, he starts calling for Elvina, but his partner moves in and ends up getting her face injured, so she backs off. Curious, the zombie asks the young master when he realized that fire was the holy element. Yuki says he just thought the flames looked different from what they'd seen in the dungeon up to that point. He also says it looked like Saki's light, and that's when Elvina explains that stuff is an undead's natural enemy. She says that kind of thing makes her heart race, and the hero just tells her to stop with the jokes. Suddenly, the knight uses an attack called Sanctuary of the Ring of Fire, trapping the two of them in flames. The maid says he's still a dungeon boss, and it looks like he's not going to let them escape. The protagonist considers summoning the vampire, but the girl explains he can only keep one summon active, so the hero says they'll have to deal with it. Elvina says the young master is amazing for wanting to fight a monster, even though he's a tamer. The boy says that's obvious because she's his partner. At that, the maid gets serious and tells her master they'll fight together. Yuki says it's time to see what all that leveling up did for both of them. He starts checking the system for his new skill, the one he should have gotten after leveling up. It's called the Evil Eye, and with it he can see a monster's stats and abilities. Right then, the boy realizes the boss is about to attack. He grabs the maid and quickly dodges the hit. Yuki explains the eye skill to her and says he can even tell how dangerous the monster is. The zombie says that's a basic monster tamer skill, and that the eye shows the true nature of all monsters. Then the hero cuts her off to warn that the monster's coming. Without wasting time, the maid rushes in and lands a clean kick on it. In a charming way, she says she can focus completely on attacking no matter what, but they realize the hit didn't do any damage at all. Using his eye, the protagonist sees the knight is actually a fire-type monster. He explains there's a small fire monster moving inside the armor, and that the knight is just a shell. Then the girl says the strategy's decided and tells her master not to get distracted. At that moment, the hero sees the enemy move and tells the maid to jump to the right. He keeps calling out instructions so his partner can dodge the attacks. That way she manages to land a punch right on the knight's helmet. The monster tries to strike back, but the zombie manages to retreat. Elvina says it's the first time he's reacted like he actually felt the hit, but the young guy explains the knight dodged it. Yuki tries to give another order, but the enemy rushes straight at him. At the last second, his maid saves him from a brutal blow. With the young guy in her arms, the girl tells him to use his skill. Her skill is called Owner of the Entire Jungle. She explains that the protagonist can use the abilities of the monsters he's contracted. They say this skill boosts his stats for a short time. The hero will be able to hit the monster without it dodging, but he can only use it once, so it's risky. Determined, he says they need to finish this on the next attack. Suddenly, the monster starts chaining sword strikes in a combo, and the zombie dodges fast, but the protagonist ends up getting hit. Lying on the ground, he tells the maid not to worry and to keep following the instructions. That way she gets behind the knight. That's when the young guy uses his skill. With one powerful kick, the girl sends the boss flying, slamming into the wall. Exhausted, the hero celebrates that they pulled it off. Elvina says that skill drains her a lot, so she's going to head out first, and she does. The boy tells the maid to wait because he can't move his legs, but she ignores him. Sometime later, the protagonist meets up with the vampire and says he barely made it back. The man says it's good the kid's still alive. Changing the subject, the hero asks about Elvina and where she is. The Demon King says she's right there. When Yuki gets closer, he finds the zombie lying on a pile of flowers. The vampire explains that's how they honor the dead, and asks if it's very different from human customs. Confused, the boy asks why all this is happening. The boss says she's undead, and that this race's ability is basically trading the destruction of their body for massive power. The kid remembers the abilities he saw in the system. On his knees, he realizes the maid paid for it with her life. Desperate, the hero yells that he never asked her to do that. He only wanted to beat the enemy. The man says the boy wanted to protect this dungeon from humans. Annoyed, he says the girl just did what was best for that cause, and that it's his responsibility as Demon King. But the protagonist disagrees and says it's his fault. He should have thought it through instead of going along with Elvina's plan. Thinking about the orphanage kids, Yuki realizes he should have fought to the very end. Crying, he says it all happened again because he's too weak. Jumping in, the man says that's exactly why he's going to make him strong enough to summon him. Then the hero says there has to be some skill to bring Elvina back, since he's a monster tamer. The vampire says there isn't, and explains that a tamer's role is to use monsters, and because of that they don't come back. The boy is crushed when he hears that. Just then someone shows up and tells the man not to be so cruel. When he sees who it is, the vampire says they already came to a conclusion about this. The girl says this kid wasn't included in that discussion. At that moment, the protagonist uses his evil eye to check her out. Her name is May. She's a maid with the holy attribute and a resurrection skill. Seeing that, the boy is shocked. With a creepy smile, she asks if he's interested in the resurrection method. Still stunned, the hero asks if she can really bring her back with that skill. May realizes the boy can see her ability, so she wouldn't even need to explain it. But the boy says he can only see what the skill does. There are always conditions. The vampire says the boy can only pull it off right now and tells the maid to explain everything. So the girl introduces herself as May, the head maid. She says she's in charge of taking care of everyone in the dungeon and handling backup resurrections. She adds that humans come to kill monsters, and her job is basically to be the safety net when things go wrong. She explains the skill has conditions, like a huge mana cost, which makes it pretty inefficient. Then the maid gives an example. A young guy died and got brought back to life. In that case, the woman would need almost as much mana as it takes to build an entire floor of this dungeon. So she explains that bringing Elvina back would cost way more, and because of that, the dungeon would end up smaller. The hero asks if that would make the dungeon easier to attack and conquer, and the maid says yes. The second condition is that you can't resurrect someone if that person's mana is completely drained. May says Elvina still has a little mana left, but it'll be gone in at most 10 days, so they'd have to get more from somewhere else. Then the woman reveals that's why they wanted to ask the young guy to clear a really big dungeon. Surprised, Yuki says they could use the resurrection skill without limits if they steal mana from other dungeons. The vampire says that's one of the goals, but the dungeons they've dealt with so far aren't even close to enough. At that point, the protagonist asks how much mana they need, but the maid says she doesn't really know much about human rankings. Still, she says everyone got mad when she suggested they clear some massive dungeon. Looking down, the Demon King explains they didn't want to put the key piece in a risky plan because of Elvina. Annoyed, the hero insists on doing it, but Liber says it's reckless, and that both the new monster and the young guy would end up like Elvina. The kid argues he still hasn't found a way to get stronger, but this is the only option to save her. He says that's one of the reasons the demon made the contract. Right then, the Demon King summons the butler to train the kid. Liber says the young guy will be under Vince's care for the next 7 days. Then the protagonist starts following the butler. The vampire asks May to follow them, because the old man was totally against using humans. He says the kid might literally end up dying because of the butler. After that, the protagonist gets teleported into the dungeon along with the old man. The man explains this is part of Lord Liber's power, and that he gave each of them a floor. He says the kid is the first human to ever see the executive floors. Then the hero asks if the old man is going to help him level up and stuff. The old man replies that for humans, leveling up means taking mana from monsters and dungeons. It's explained that adventurers damage the whole dungeon because they steal mana from monsters without asking. He says the kid is under contract with Liber, so he can't level up inside this dungeon. Confused, the protagonist asks how he's supposed to be trained. Suddenly, a sword gets tossed into his hands. Vince says there are tons of things to teach, and that up to now the kid hasn't built anything. Getting ready to attack, the butler says the kid has no strength, no knowledge, and no talent. With a demon-like stare, the old man says the boy is going to have to earn all of that if he wants to save Elvina. Right away, the man starts attacking the protagonist with a bunch of strikes at the same time. The hero thinks the butler seriously wants to kill him. But Vince says that's not it, and that he'll give up on the kid if he can't pull this off. He says that outcome would be better for the dungeon and for Lord Liber. As he keeps coming at the kid, the old man tells him to last at least 3 hours. Then the kid manages to block the old man's attack. Activating his skill, he says he'll bet his life on bringing Elvina back. With his skill, the hero can see the old man has the blood attribute, and his ability is Beautiful Blood Flower Blade. Freaked out, the kid realizes the level gap is so huge his eye can't even read the attacks. Totally panicked, Yuki thinks about moving somewhere safe where nothing dangerous will show up, but the man charges straight at him. A sword slash grazes him. Still, the kid manages to dodge several follow-up strikes in a surprising way. But the butler says the kid's movements are full of wasted motion. In no time, he closes in and says that's why he can easily shut down any counterattack. He also explains the kid's decisions are way too slow and he takes too long to think about his next move. Then the old man goes in for another attack, but the hero dodges. The kid tries a straight-on attack, but his opponent dodges too. Then the old man says there's no point rushing in, because the result is still the same. So he lands a straight-on frontal strike with his sword, but then he realizes the kid managed to block it, and he says the kid's moves have gotten a little better. So the hero explains that he watched how his opponent's blade moves and learned the most efficient way to block it. Determined, Yuki says it's not just about stats. This eye lets him copy how a monster moves its body. The man says he gets what the kid means, but says it's still not enough. While attacking, he explains their body structures are different, so their sword skills end up being different too. Nervous, the hero realizes his opponent has been holding back this whole time. Then the man throws out a heavy, powerful strike, saying he's been doing this for years. Worried, the protagonist notices his arms and legs are wearing out, and the danger warnings keep piling up. On top of that, he sees the last hit didn't use any mana at all. It was just pure sword skill. The kid tries to swing back, but the old man dodges, As he steps away, the man readies another attack and tells the kid it's time to test him. A scary red aura starts leaking off his sword. Suddenly, a bunch of danger alerts pop up, and the protagonist starts freaking out. On his knees, he thinks he needs actual data on the enemy's abilities, not just danger notifications. That's when the butler uses his skill. With it activated, the kid tries to predict the attack and defend, but it doesn't work, and he ends up completely wrecked on the floor. Some time later, he wakes up. Sitting in an armchair, the butler says the kid finally woke up. Then he tells him to follow him. The kid's confused because he's pretty sure he took that skill head on, so it's weird that he's not hurt. The man explains May healed him, and it didn't take much mana since he was still alive. In his head, the old man remembers how the kid tried to steal his technique at the very last moment. Thinking about it makes him smile, because it sparked his interest in the kid. Walking through the mansion, Vince says they're moving on to proper training now. He goes into a room, shows a bunch of monsters, and says the kid is going to face all of them. He tells the kid to treat them carefully. The protagonist just says he never thought he'd get used to this, but he accepts the challenge. What he didn't expect was that the challenge was serving tea to the monsters. The butler explains that a first-class swordsman doesn't waste a single movement, every action is optimized, so this job is perfect for cutting out wasted motion, because it's work where you can't afford to slip up. He says the kid needs to learn to control his whole body, and that skills grow depending on how you use them. Vince says all kinds of monsters are at this party, and the kid has to figure out what each one wants. So the protagonist decides to watch the butler's movements and copy them, but the kid struggles just to hold several plates in one hand, so he ends up dropping everything on the floor. While cleaning up the mess, he realizes it's really hard to replicate what the butler does, so he decides to adapt what the old man does into his own style. 2 days pass. One of the monsters tells the newbie that Lord Vint likes him, and that means the kid's pretty strong. Awkwardly, the kid says he's not strong, but he's going to be from now on. The monster immediately lunges at him and says he's going to train him, but the protagonist dodges the hits easily. Without any trouble, he lands a right hook on the monster. On the 4th day of work, the hero sees a monster with a cold. Being really gentle, the kid covers his customer with a blanket. With a charming smile, he offers the monster something warm. As time goes on, the hero starts to understand why the butler chose this kind of training. Finally, the 6th day arrives. The young guy serves a bat in this smooth, flirty way, but the little thing ends up knocking him over, since its ability is basically being a leech. A week goes by, and the kid decides to serve tea to the butler. The man says the kid still needs to improve in a bunch of areas, but his manners are acceptable. Just hearing that makes Yuki emotional because this week was packed with fights and tea parties. The kid thinks the training is finally over, but the old man cuts him off, saying the end starts now. Vint grabs his sword and starts getting ready for a fight. Right then, the old man says the kid already copied that skill without even realizing it, but now he needs to truly make it his own. With a terrifying look, he warns that the kid's gonna bite the dust if he can't pull it off. Nervous, the hero says he already thinks he deserves to die if he fails this mission. Using his ability, Yuki realizes defending normally is impossible, and the only way is to shut it down before it happens. So the protagonist decides to use the old man's skill. He rushes at the old man, who blocks the attack, but the kid's sword snaps instantly, and the impact hits him hard. Totally expressionless, the butler says it's disappointing. Hurt, the kid says the old man doesn't get to decide his limits. Then the kid uses that skill again, but reshaped to fit his own style. Seeing that, the old man is shocked. Without any fear, the hero charges in, saying he'll win just by throwing out a sheer number of strikes. He attacks head-on with his sword, but the butler defends. The man says the young guy was impressive. Still, he explains the kid won't be able to keep going. At that moment, the hero ends up passing out in his master's arms. His phone slips out of his pocket, but the two of them are already leaving. Saki was texting her friend, saying she found something about the investigation he asked for. She's worried and wonders if Yuki will be okay because a B-rank dungeon might be a bit much. Sometime later, the hero says that the next day he's going to face a dungeon. The butler explains the kid's styles still aren't complete, but admits the brat's gotten kind of decent with a sword. Still, Liber questions whether an E-rank kid can really go into that dungeon. Yuki answers that he'll just be tagging along with the investigation group. Then the man asks about the contract the kid's going to sign. Yuki says he's thinking about signing with them, and everyone in the room is surprised. Sometime later, at the Adventurers Guild, Saki meets up with her friend. She asks if he started training with a sword, and he asks how she knew. He apologizes for asking something so difficult, but she says it's fine. A little awkwardly, she says it's a relief having someone she knows nearby. Suddenly, a man calls out to Saki. He tells everyone to hurry up so they can start the raid. The kid asks if that guy's in their group, and Saki says no. She explains he's a volunteer who accepted the guild's request. Looking down, Saki says they just want to rank up fast, so they use an S rank like her to cash in on the results. Nervous, the volunteer asks if the hero is A rank, since he's in Saki's group, but Yuki says he's actually E rank. Hearing that, the guy starts mocking him for being below his level. Then the volunteer tells Saki to ditch the kid and just take his group since they're B rank, but she says her friend already cleared 2 dungeons solo. After hearing that, 2 members of the group wonder how the kid is only E rank. At that point, the B rank guy gets annoyed, because his plan was to guide her to a clear and jump up to A rank. That plan gets ruined if there's someone who can clear everything alone. Then Saki gets straight to the point and says the dungeon they're investigating is the Sealed Wish Cave. She explains that usually a dungeon's rank is decided based on how dangerous the boss is. Curious, Yuki asks how they'll know if the boss is dangerous. So Saki opens a map and says they can tell by how complex the dungeon is. Rule number 1, the stronger the boss, the wider and more complex each floor gets. Rule number 2, the stronger the boss, the more floors there are before you reach its room. On top of that, the more tricks the boss uses to protect itself, the harder the dungeon becomes. After looking it over, Saki rates this dungeon as B rank, since it only has 22 floors, but her friend argues they can't find the boss floor, even after searching everywhere. Suddenly, a type of monster starts attacking the group. The volunteer manages to hit it and starts showing off for the girl. Embarrassed, she says hunting monsters isn't part of this investigation request. Still showing off, the guy tells the E rank that he didn't do anything. But then, all of a sudden, he stops moving when he realizes there's a gigantic monster right behind him. It's a massive stone golem. Saki and Yuki rush the monster. The heroine uses her skill, Shining Slash, and destroys the enemy in a single hit. Annoyed, she explains she doesn't need their fighting power and asks the group to just focus on investigating. Nervous, the hero apologizes and says he was trying to time his attack so he wouldn't get in his friend's way. Surprised, Saki asks if he synced his attack with hers, and the boy says yes, and that it seemed pretty hard to do. From a distance, the S rank adventurer is impressed by the kid's level. Smiling, she says her friend saved her and that he did a good job. Then she tells them to leave the fighting to her and asks the boy to focus only on the investigation. Seeing that, the volunteer gets irritated, planning to find the boss room by himself to prove his worth. But 10 hours go by and so far they haven't found a single trace of this so-called room. The leader looks at the map and says the group has already checked everywhere, even the hidden areas. Then the hero asks about a wall. The volunteer replies that the kid doesn't know what he's talking about. He explains that a dungeon is a separate space made of mana, and that this place isn't a natural cave. Irritated, the man walks up and kicks the wall. Leaning in close, he says the brat's going to hit a layer of mana and get hurt if he tries to dig through it. Showing his magic eye, Yuki says that's not what it looks like. Looking around, the hero explains that this cave is made of the same material as that stone golem. Without thinking twice, Saki uses her Shining Slash on one of the walls. She ends up opening a huge hole and orders everyone to go inside. That's when the group comes face to face with an even bigger stone golem. Seeing that monster, the volunteer is stunned. The leader explains they weren't inside a normal dungeon. The whole group was inside a golem made to imitate a dungeon. She says it was done to hide its true rank. Yuki asks if that means this is the real first floor. If so, this dungeon is enormous. Nervously, the heroine says this dungeon is definitely S rank. Then the leader spots a floating castle in the distance. On top of that, she figures the golem is probably shut down to avoid wasting mana since it failed its mission. The golem's mission was to stop an S rank intruder like the heroine. The volunteer is confused because he thought monsters were just really strong animals, but Saki says dungeons are the front line against enemies. In his head, the hero agrees with her, because he's seen that monsters have clear strategy, intelligence, and even feelings. Still, the woman says the group is lucky they can attack the boss before it fully hides itself. Determined, she says the investigation is over and now the cleanup begins. She points at the portal and tells the rest of the group to go back now and report to the guild, but she makes an exception for the protagonist and asks if he's staying too. Surprised, the boy asks why, and Saki says she needs someone who can take information about the boss back if necessary. Stepping closer, she says it has to be him. Then the girl pulls the hero closer and says that this time, they both have to make it back home. With his head down, the protagonist agrees. Thinking of the people he cares about, he says he won't let anyone else die. Determined, the heroine scoops her friend up in her arms. Using her skill Luminous Formula, she flies off into the distance. Confused, the volunteer says he can't see anything anymore. Angry, he tells himself he's not going back like this. Quickly, the pair arrives, cutting their way down to the deepest level of the dungeon. Suddenly, someone says they never imagined a human would make it there alone. It's the boss, and she's upside down, dropping down to the ground. She introduces herself as Karat, the jewel golem, and says she's going to become the most beautiful demon king of them all. Saki realizes the golem has been stockpiling mana this whole time. The demon admits it, and explains that little by little she's been improving her beauty. Suddenly, she lunges at the hero. He manages to dodge her attacks without much trouble. As he grabs his sword, Yuki realizes the enemy is fast and one hit would be fatal. But he isn't scared because the Goblin Queen is slow compared to the butler. So the protagonist lands a sword strike, but it's useless. Her body is insanely tough, but the hero says the only thing he needs to do is make an opening. And right then, Saki shows up behind her. She uses the skill Luminous Break. Surprised, the boss says she ended up getting scratched. Confident, the S rank girl says that proves her body isn't unbreakable. From a distance, the protagonist just watches his friend's insane skill. Worried, the girl realizes her opponent is planning something. Sword in hand, she tells the hero not to let his guard down. Then the two of them rush in, trying to wear the boss down with non-stop attacks, but Karat says she already knows their weak point. At that moment, the hero stops running and warns that the demon is using a ridiculous amount of mana. Outside, that giant golem starts moving to block the path to the portal. The boss tells them they're going to get crushed if they don't do something. That's when Saki realizes she's been collecting golem material this whole time. She starts thinking about what she can do to stop both the demon and the stone golem. Suddenly, her friend calls out to her, The protagonist says they can't let the boss run free, so he's going to hold her off. Relieved, the girl agrees and sprints out of the area. Karat mocks him, saying he can't even scratch her, and he's basically been tossed aside as a sacrifice. He argues back that it's not that, it's confidence. Right then, Yuki remembers everyone who's believed in him up to now. With his sword in hand, he says he has to live up to that trust. When the golem senses the boy's mana, it actually gets scared. The hero says that from now on, he's going to fight like a monster tamer. With a heavy strike, he manages to slice off part of the golem. He explains he just used the boss's movement and power, no wasted effort. Then the demon uses a healing slash on Carrot. She immediately goes on the attack, but the boy blocks it with his sword. Quickly, he lands another hit and cuts the golem again. Annoyed, she says he's been using her this whole time. Yuki just agrees and says, "I'm a monster tamer." Carrot loses it because her outer shell has been damaged. She starts screaming, saying she'll show him what a real skill looks like. Then she straight up evolves, like a Pokemon, boosting her toughness and even her looks. Furious, she says she's not even going to add the brat to her collection. She's just going to crush him like a grain of sand. She tries to hit him, but the protagonist barely dodges. Nervous, he says she's not very creative since she grew up relying on her underlings. Carrot says the bigger the jewel, the more valuable it is. But the hero says what matters is how beautiful your cut is. Sword in hand, he uses the blood skill. Shocked, she wonders how a human can use the same skill as a monster. Then the hero uses it in his own style and deals massive damage to the boss golem. After the strike, he realizes he's badly hurt. On the ground, the woman says she can't believe she had to throw away almost her whole body because of that terrifying skill. Then she rushes the kid in a cheap, dirty attack, but the kid blocks it like he's got a Sharingan. Desperate, she asks what he can even do now that he's so injured. Agreeing with her, the boy starts a summoning, and a cute little bat gets summoned. Earlier, it's explained that the boy is going to reuse the blood he stored with the bat. Yuki says the skill needs a lot of blood, and he can get 2 chances if he drinks ahead of time. Vin argues that the boy can only contract 1 monster at a time, and he could straight up die if he messes up both tries. Yuki says he'll fire the first shot using his own strawberry juice, so the second one is guaranteed to work. Shocked, the butler explains that doing that basically puts the boy's life on the line. Still, the kid decides to do it against the dungeon boss. Then he introduces himself as Yuki, the monster tamer and adventurer who uses friends and enemies the same way. Getting right to it, he lands a decisive, triumphant blow on Karab, making her disappear. Confident, the hero says he's human, even though he has a contract with the Demon King. After the dungeon boss is defeated, a massive amount of mana bursts out. The hero absorbs all of it, so much that he passes out. But Saki gets there in time to catch him. She's amazed he managed to do all of that on his own. Sometime later, all the press gets called in. A guy in a suit announces that the person involved in a special situation inside a dungeon is going to come forward and explain what happened. He says this person was the one who contributed the most to clearing that dungeon. And that person is the S-rank adventurer, Saki. The heroine gets ready to give her explanation. In this case, it was her friend who dumped all this work on her, because he had something important to take care of. The hero comes running back to ask the butler if the resurrection worked. May says the kid showed up just in time for the last part. Vince says the young man shouldn't even look at the ritual, because the mana will hurt his eyes. Then the maid tells Elvina that break time is over, and that as head maid, she's not letting her wander around the underworld forever. At that moment, she uses an underworld skill. Pretty quickly, the zombie maid wakes up. She's confused when she sees her young master. The girl asks if he died, but the hero explains that actually, Elvina is the one who came back to life. Then the zombie realizes it was the head maid, and says she's surprised. She thought she died for nothing. Relieved, the protagonist says he's glad she's okay. With her sharp sense of humor, the maid asks if saying that to a zombie is some kind of undead joke. Killing the moment, Vince shows up saying they've both got work to do and need to change clothes. Hearing that, Elvina asks if the master is working as a butler. Before the old man can explain, the head maid shows up with the work uniforms. Already changed, the hero is impressed by his new work outfit. Then the old man explains that today, the young man is going to play the king. When he opens the door, all the monsters cheer at the human's arrival. Yuki's confused and asks what's going on. Liber is there and says the dungeon the kid cleared had a ton of mana. Mage explains that thanks to that she was able to resurrect more people than planned. Liber says those monsters were brought back thanks to the human, so they want to meet him. Then a bunch of monsters crowd around the kid wanting to meet him, and they invite him to drink until morning. Before the hero can say anything, the maid grabs him by the blazer and starts dragging him away. Then the vampire says the kid should accept everyone's gratitude like a real monster tamer. But the protagonist knows he didn't do it for them. He did it because he ended up getting to know Elvina. Looking at all the monsters in the room, the young guy suddenly thinks of the orphanage. With a smile, he says he's happy he was able to save all of them. Suddenly, a wolf says he heard the young man is Lord Vince's best disciple, catching the maid off guard. Seeing that, the butler thinks the MC still needs more training, which makes the vampire realize he really does like the kid. Pointing at the young man, he says he even prepared the kid's clothes, but the old man shoots back that the boss did the same thing. The vampire admits he never imagined the protagonist would end up using the monsters instead of being used by them. He also admits the young man pulled off more than expected. But even while saying that, the way the vampire looks at the kid is kind of suspicious. Meanwhile, Saki is in the interview and asks them to repeat the question. Repeating it, the man tells her to hurry up and bring the real evidence. He says she must be hiding a real crazy monster and claims he's going to take it. That night, this mysterious man corners one of Saki's team volunteers to question him about what happened. Panicking, the A-rank volunteer reveals the low-level adventurer's name is Yuki. Hearing that, the hooded guy remembers a kid with the same name and rank. Terrified, the volunteer says he has nothing to do with it, but the mysterious man says he can't let him go. The next day, the protagonist is on his way to meet someone. He goes to the Great Cave-in Memorial to leave flowers for the people who died in the collapse. That makes the hero think of his orphanage, because he has a lot of news to tell them. Suddenly, the boy spots someone there. Crouched down, the mysterious man introduces himself as Zapper and says he's an A-class adventurer. He says he's there to keep an eye on the young man, but Yuki argues he's just E-rank. But the man says the kid was involved in clearing the fake dungeon, and he doesn't need to hide it. Sharp as ever, Zapper says the kid's plan was to let Saki take the credit, so they don't draw attention. The hero argues that he only helped guide the adventurers to a safe place, but the hooded guy disagrees and says it was the kid who took down the dungeon boss, while the heroine was busy fighting the golems. Then the man explains that having a bunch of disposable pawns isn't enough to conquer a dungeon. He says you need good weapons if you want to make real money. Hearing that, the hero assumes the hooded guy wants to join the group. Zapper points out the kid is alone, and there's a limit to what you can do without anyone backing you up. He says everything's different when you're in a party, and invites the boy to join. Nervous, the protagonist thanks him for the offer but says his goal isn't to make money off dungeons. Calmly, the man says he got rejected, and there's nothing he can do about it. But then his expression totally changes, and he says he'll have to use violence. He swings a fire hammer at the hero, who barely manages to dodge. The attack ends up burning the flowers. Annoyed, Yuki tells him to stop, because this place is a cemetery. Adjusting his glasses, the hooded guy says using magic on the surface is illegal, but refusing his offer is an even bigger sin. Then he manages to restrain the kid. Zapper puts his hand on the boy's face and uses his skill, ice binding. The gray-haired man says the hero was made to conquer dungeons. Then he smacks the kid in the head, saying he'll enter every dungeon the boy explores. Zapper calls himself a skill killer and says adventurers aren't a threat, so the kid can go cry at the guild. As he leaves, he says he'll be waiting for a better answer, before the young guy ends up dead. Sometime later, the vampire gets pissed that someone tried to steal one of his pieces. The protagonist says the group needs to figure out some kind of counterattack. Vince says the kid messed up by not carrying a sword, but he argues it was his day off and his low level makes people stop and question him. Still, he admits he would have lost either way, because he needs to figure out how to deal with that magic. Then Liber says the kid is a monster tamer, so he needs a good monster who can use magic. That's when a monster named Makina Muchoya shows up, an elf. The vampire says nobody understands magic better than her. Later, the elf leads the hero around her floor and says she can't stand that old butler. Yuki says she's never seen the girl at the tea parties. Irritated, the girl says she's not going to some bat party, and she's not even 1,000 years old yet. She says she's still 1499. Suddenly, she leans in with a love-struck look and says the old man will hate it if she makes his disciple even stronger than him. Spinning her little fanfic, she says the butler will get jealous if his disciple gets attached to her, turning it into some forbidden love story. Changing the subject, the elf says she'll help the boy learn magic, but magical research needs stimulation. Then she shows him a massive library, and the hero asks if he has to read all of that. Makina says there's way more than that and that most of her floor is basically made of books. She says the boy probably doesn't even know what magic is, but he argues magic is that thing where you use mana. The elf suddenly leans in and asks what the difference is between magic and a skill. Then she explains, skills are personal techniques while magic is universal. She says skills are split into 3 types. The first type is skills you gain from your job. The second type is unique racial skills. And the third type is skills that appear when a technique you've mastered gets pushed to a higher level. She finishes by saying they're all basically cheat techniques that only work because of the user's body, training, and talent. So sometimes you can't copy them. And also, 2 skills can look the same on the outside but be totally different on the inside. She asks if the boy's ever felt that, and he says he learned that lesson the hard way. Then she concludes that if 2 people use the same mana and chant the spell the same way, they'll get the same result. This is a universal absolute rule. But Makina says there's a second issue. Some people just can't use magic. She explains it's because chanting is really hard. You need at least a whole book's worth of chants, even for a short spell. Even after hearing that, the hero says he's never heard anyone chant for that long. So the elf explains that mages make up for the chanting by using a special staff, carving magic circles, or chanting in their head. She says the more you study magic, the more little tricks you learn. Then the woman summons the fire hammer. Makina explains that this is a chantless cast, and that the boy can use it by holding the image in his head and saying the trigger phrase. It's a basic skill, but it can change depending on how well you understand the original chant. The caster can replay the whole text in their mind, or just use an image or a sound. Yuki comments that this must be why a spell can look the same, but the result comes out different. Maitokwa says the boy can start making the spell his own once he really gets that. On top of that, he can keep only part of the original chant and fill in the missing power to match what a full chant would do. Excited, the protagonist asks if using magic is basically just memorizing the chant. The elf cuts him off, saying he's not wrong, but if all he does is memorize, that's all he'll ever be able to do. She explains a chant is basically a set of instructions for a spell, and he needs to understand it if he wants to create new spells or tweak existing ones. Then Makina says she knows humans don't have much time, so he should be grateful for what she's about to do. At that moment, she uses a spell that simulates and projects the contents of a book. She says this world is basically her fire magic book, and if the boy clears this virtual space, he'll learn what's written in it. Confident, Yuki grabs his sword and says this kind of thing is his specialty. But then two giant monsters show up, along with a ridiculous number of books, and the boy asks if he seriously has to clear all of that. His new teacher says yes and asks if he thinks it's impossible. He answers by slicing one of the monsters with his sword. Determined, the hero says he'll finish it all in no time. 3 days pass and the boy is still clearing the virtual dungeon. Now he's fighting a wind element monster. The monster fires off a wind attack that sends him flying, but his teacher saves him with a spell called air capture. Super bluntly, she tells her first student he really has no talent for this. Frustrated, the protagonist says he finally gets why most adventurers don't chant, because in a fight, it leaves you wide open. The elf explains that magic wasn't made for fighting, but for tricking the world and rewriting it however you want. Then the hero decides to try using the stone arrow spell, but he realizes the power drop when he doesn't chant is just pathetic, and his teacher says this is where people's differences really show. She tells him he's awful at filling in the missing parts with imagination, and that none of his elements have any power when he doesn't chant. In his head, the boy realizes that like this, he'll never beat Zapper, because the hooded guy can pick whatever spell counters him and still cast it fast anyway. Trying to stay upbeat, the elf says maybe the next wind spell will be the protagonist's thing. As training continues, Yuki agrees that maybe he'll find something he's actually good at, but he also wonders if Zapper has any element he's bad at. Meanwhile, at some camp, the gray-haired man gets word that someone is in an S-rank dungeon. It's the same dungeon as the heroes group, where 2 S-rank adventurers had to retreat, so the leader decides to go in. His party members panic and try to talk him out of it, saying it's too dangerous. He agrees it's dangerous, but he doesn't seem to care much. Suddenly, a giant worm drops from the sky to crush them. It rushes toward the hooded man, who doesn't even flinch or try to run. Calm and confident, Zapper casts a multi-element spell all at once and fires it at the monster. Wiping it out, one of the members is stunned to see again chantless casting with every element. The leader explains that S-class dungeons are deadly, and that's why they need to chase a certain someone before he goes deeper. Your subordinate talks about the damage the worm caused to the team, but your boss doesn't care. He says he's not going to waste mana on incompetence. The guy says he's saving it to go after something special, meaning the protagonist. Back at training, Makina tells her first disciple he's honestly talentless. Lying on the ground, the hero starts crying, saying that in the end he couldn't cast a single spell. The elf then says the kid is awful with the main elements, so it's not even worth trying, smaller stuff like insects. Getting up, Yuki says he'll just have to make do with what he's got. Hearing that, his teacher scolds him and says they haven't even reached the first stage of training. All fired up, she says, magic is basically people rewriting the world, and that includes common sense. With a deadly look, the elf says she won't allow certain words, like giving up. Still, the hero's confused and asks what he's supposed to do. Cutting him off, Makina says it's easy, and she's done something similar with that old guy. Smiling, she tells the kid to break things down and make a new rule. She says the next step is applied magic, and he's already learned enough theory. So the boy asks if the idea is to create a brand new spell, one he can actually be good at, and she confirms it. Makina says he has to use pure instinct to move mana and rewrite the world to match a support chant. She's still explaining when suddenly something grabs her attention. When she sees what it is, the mage starts casting water magic. The one who showed up is Zapper, casting fire magic. Nervous, the protagonist asks why that guy is here. She says it looks like the kid got followed. Using a magic circle, the teacher tells him not to rely on summons, solve it with magic. Right then, the protagonist gets teleported to an unknown floor. The hooded guy shows up and says the kid really was hiding his strength. He asks if the brat has an answer now, not even giving him a chance to reply. The man fires a water spell at the hero and he manages to dodge. Zapper says the protagonist's defiant look says everything. Now he attacks with an earth element spell, but Yuki blocks it using his swordsmanship. Seeing that, the gray-haired guy looks surprised. Then he uses a mud spell that starts dragging the hero down. Panicking, the kid starts casting a chanted spell, but his opponent uses a wind hammer before the spell can finish. Straight up, the guy says the kid's magic isn't anything special if he needs chanting. Then the hero gets up and says he'll have to create a new spell. He doesn't have a choice. The protagonist charges the mage. With his sword, the kid manages to close the distance, but the hooded guy uses a lightning spell, blasting him back. In his head, he realizes a miracle never showed up in his life. Everyone left, and they never came back. Suddenly, a bunch of rocks start falling because of the wind magic. The hero uses the chance to run and hide. He's exhausted and about to give up, but a voice pops into his head, calling him first disciple. Startled, Yuki wonders where it came from, and his teacher says it was her magic. She says the kid's already top tier when it comes to knowledge, but what he's missing is deciding what kind of spell he wants to make. The elf says he needs to let his feelings flow and use that power. Then the protagonist starts remembering all the tragedies in his life, and he decides what he's feeling is pure rage. Zapper shows up to face him, getting right to it. The hooded guy throws a flame spell at him, but he sees it doesn't do anything at all. Seeing that, the elf says it's a good spell. It's a kind of purple magic shield. With a hateful expression, the protagonist announces his magic is a spell born from his rage, one that denies magic itself. Annoyed, the gray-haired guy questions it, asking how it can cancel his spells. He says he doesn't want the kid in his group anymore, and instead he's going to get rid of him. He uses lightning and water magic, but it still has no effect. The elf explains that magic sends your intent into mana to rewrite the world, and that void is literally the exact opposite of that. Laughing, she says that attribute could be called void, and that only that troublesome disciple could pull off a spell like that. Out of patience, Zapper says he's going to overload the kid with a massive amount of magic. Then he fires a fire, water, and lightning spell straight at the boy. Seeing that, the protagonist realizes just defending won't be enough. So Yuki creates his own sword with that magic and charges the sorcerer. Impressed by the result, Meishina says her disciple has top-tier knowledge. Desperate, the man throws up an ice wall and a wind wall. But the hero starts slicing through everything with his sword like it's nothing. So the hooded guy decides to use a fire spell, but it gets blocked by the kid's magic shield. Nervous, Zapper realizes he's about to run out of mana. Meanwhile, the protagonist rushes straight at him. Showing off his skill, he uses an ability called Flow, which creates multiple swords floating around him. The man sees the kid closing in, but still thinks he can defend himself in time. With no other option, he uses a wind hammer on himself to launch himself away. Laughing, he says he'll let the kid off this time, but next time it'll end differently. Using the spell Wind Wing, Zapper escapes while yelling that he's going to break the kid's spell. Panicking, his master appears and tells the boy not to let him get away. She says that old man will laugh in both their faces if he does, but the protagonist says he has a plan, and asks if it's okay to remove the restriction on his hand. Meanwhile, the hooded man flees in desperation, but then he notices a full chant coming from his enemy. He freaks out. There's no way the kid could pull that off, right after a fight. Without thinking twice, he decides to retreat, but it turns out the one chanting the spell is Mei, who Yuki summoned. The hero explains he taught Mei the chant through their mental link. Smiling, he says he's a monster tamer and his allies can handle anything. Right then, the headmaid fires a black arrow at the opponent. Zapper instantly uses a holy shield to defend himself, but one of the arrows pierces right through it. It's the void arrow fired by the hero. The magic is so strong it finishes the mysterious man for good. Meanwhile, at the entrance to the surface, a bunch of men are gathered, and one of them says the captain is still clearing another dungeon. His buddy says the only real threats are the A-rank Zapper and the adventurer Yuki. Suddenly, the protagonist steps out of the portal with Zapper slung over his back. Immediately, all the men point their spears and declare the hero under arrest. Shocked, the boy realizes it's the guild's elite unit, called the Execution Squad. Then a squad mage named Nano steps forward and tells the young man to stay still. Not understanding anything, the protagonist asks why he's being arrested too. One of the guards explains they've received a bunch of complaints from adventurers about him. Desperate, Yuki says he's the only victim here. At that moment, Zapper wakes up and blasts fire. With no choice, the hero summons his void saber to fight. Suddenly, several guards rush the gray-haired man to attack him, but he uses a thunder explosion and sends them all flying. Quickly, he grabs the mage as a hostage and tells everyone not to come closer. Then Zapper starts summoning multiple magic circles. Worried, the protagonist realizes it's a large-scale spell and he won't be able to protect everyone, so he tells the guards to stay within the shadow of his shield. But then a mysterious girl shows up. With her ability, she can see the enemy's mana consumption. Her name is Ginki and she's the captain and a knight of the Execution Squad. Totally unfazed, she uses a skill called Clumsy Dragon. That skill makes the target get hit by an arrow before the bow even fires it. Furious, the gray-haired man decides to defend himself with his stone binding. Smiling, the girl says she'll need Yuki's magic, which catches the kid off guard. Following her orders, the hero uses his void saber while Zapper tries to defend himself. Then the captain fires several arrows at both targets. The boy doesn't get why, but he blocks with the void shield anyway. With a smug look, the girl says she knew he'd be able to block it. Still totally confused, the hero wonders how this woman knows his every move. Meanwhile, Jinky shows up behind Zapper and hits him with everything she's got. Seeing the guy's been taken down, all the guards rush over to arrest him. Then the girl thanks Yuki for helping her with his magic. Curious, the boy asks how she knows so much about that. The captain answers that her ability is the invisible vision Seishi Dodo Gengen, which lets her see people's status. She says it's similar to the young man's evil eye. One of the guards shows up to talk about the kid's situation, but the captain cuts him off, saying he helped with the arrest and the suspicion against him should be dropped. The guard walks up to the hero and says the accusations against him must have been a misunderstanding. Still, he explains they can't make an official apology yet because things aren't fully settled. Yuki says it's fine since the misunderstanding's been cleared up, and adds that he can help investigate Zapper if they need it. Changing the subject, the guard says the dungeon the kid just came out of is CES rank, and he shouldn't have gone in alone. He explains that exploring dungeons requires authorization, and going solo is against the rules. The knight says Yuki is strong enough, but the guard says that's just her personal opinion, and the kid is still E rank. Embarrassed, the captain suggests a deal. She tells the protagonist to help the group clear a dungeon they choose. That way Dugo can evaluate him, and it might let them drop the interrogations or any detention. Surprised, the hero asks why they're treating him so well, but Jinky explains that dungeon clearing progress is everything for humanity. She says she's excited to see the monster tamer's strategy. Sometime later, Liber just tells the kid to clear the dungeon like he always does. But Yuki says he'll lose his adventurer license if he brings any monster that can talk. He's trying to figure out what to do since he can't bring Elvina or the little bat, who's still recovering from the last run. Then the Demon King suggests he talk to Task, a guy who knows everything. Curious, the hero asks if he's some kind of specialist, like Machina. Surprisingly, the vampire says that guy is actually the combined collective will of all the dungeon's monsters. A little later, the boy goes to Task and says he needs to ask someone who really understands monsters. Hearing that, the Foxman gets happy and says it feels like they're soulmates. As he scoops the hero up in his arms, the monster introduces himself as Task Wild, and explains that researching monsters is just in his nature. The Foxman says humans don't even know what monsters are really like. Yuki replies that to humans, monsters are just creatures that live in dungeons. His new master says the kid isn't totally wrong, but explains that monsters are also beings that seek mana. Following that logic, the hero asks if humans are considered monsters too because of that, and Task says yes. Curious, the kid asks if Task has some kind of sense of closeness to his own species. Task says that for monsters, what matters most is whether they share the same mana source, not whether they look alike. He explains that belonging to the same dungeon matters way more than belonging to the same race. That's when the boy realizes it's more about affiliation than species. Excited, Wild leans in and asks if the kid wants a calm, silent monster to help clear dungeons. Yuki says yes, and that he needs one that can handle all kinds of situations, since he can only summon one at a time. Smiling, Task says he's got a great idea. He introduces a dragon, a reliable guard of the first floor. That dragon's main traits are its insane vitality and its huge firepower. But the dragon spits fire at the boy, who asks why it attacked out of nowhere. Wild then reveals it's the same dragon from the time his group had to run away. Hearing that, the hero gets ready to fight, but he quickly realizes the dragon is completely ignoring him. Looking down, Yuki says that even if he could make a contract with the dragon, it'd still be pointless because he doesn't have enough mana to summon it. Getting excited again, Task says they've got plenty of smaller monsters. He introduces the Shadow Claw and explains it's a monster made entirely of shadow. Seeing it, the hero gets happy, saying he'd never seen anything like it. He decides to get closer since he'll either need to make a mutual deal or earn its respect in a fight to seal the contract. But the little creature bolts without giving him any chance, so the protagonist drops to his knees and asks why all the monsters keep ignoring him. Wild explains that the kid's mana is so low that they basically look down on him. He says these monsters act on instinct, they're not smart enough to respect him. But Task says he can help the kid with that. He explains his race is Chimera, so he's considered a beast made up of all kinds of monsters. That ability lets Task freely adjust his own composition, so he can transform into other creatures, changing his stats. All of a sudden, the little shadow monster comes back. The Foxman says he'll help the kid, but that earning monster's respect is on him alone. With that in mind, the protagonist gets ready to fight. The monster rushes him, but Yuki manages to block with his sword. That's when he realizes this is going to be a tough fight. Task mentions that the Eye Owl, a dark creature that uses magic, is joining in too. It fires a magic attack at the protagonist and he blocks it with his void sword. Yuki realizes it's a battle of endurance, so he needs to strike at the right moment. Sword in hand, he waits for the enemy to close in. When the attack comes, he blocks head on. But then he realizes it was an ice rock. From a distance, he sees the owl still flying around. Annoyed, the hero decides to chase it down, no matter what. That's when Wild decides to throw another monster into the fight, a gigantic crab. The protagonist braces himself to go all out. Meanwhile, his new mentor brings out another monster, this time a poisonous one. The kid says he can't get close for safety reasons, but then he ends up passing out. With his last bit of strength, he summons Elvina to help him. Sometime later, Wild says the deeper floors are even more dangerous, but the young guy brushes it off. He argues he's almost died multiple times already. Trying to hype him up, Task says this is Liber's dungeon, and it's already impressive that the kid can handle multiple monsters. Then he asks the kid to bring him monsters from other places as a way of saying thanks. The Foxman explains that way he can learn more about himself. Smiling, he says that's why he's always had high hopes for the kid. He tells the boy to bring the monsters back alive, if possible. Thinking it over, the hero realizes the contracted monsters are strong, but none of them are versatile enough. Suddenly, he raises his hand and says he wants to try something different, like a total maniac. Sometime later, one of the guards starts briefing him on the dungeon he's about to clear. It's a B-rank dungeon with 4 floors, and each floor has different terrain. He warns him the time limit is 1 week, and the adventurer has to clear it solo. When they're close to the entrance, the man asks if the kid has any questions. Yuki just says he's ready. The guard studies him and wonders if he's treating this like a scouting run. Still, the man admits the captain must really believe in the kid's strength because it's a B-rank dungeon. After an hour, they reach the end of the cave's first floor. The fact that the hero hasn't used a single summon yet catches the guard's attention. Suddenly, several spears get thrown at the protagonist and he dodges. A bunch of demon monkeys show up to attack him. Dozens of them, swarming as a pack. With no other choice, the hero decides to use his summon. He summons the Shadow Claw. The monster immediately tears into the monkeys. The guard is shocked to see the kid has a contract with Shadow Claw. That's when he realizes this isn't some ordinary adventurer, just like his captain, who also clears dungeons without help. Sometime later, the hero reaches the 3rd floor, which is basically an ocean. A kind of giant squid shows up and tries to attack him. On this floor, he can't use Shadow Claw, since the little guy can't travel through water, so he dismisses his monster. Without wasting time, Yuki summons the giant crab, pretty much perfect for this situation. Seeing that, the guard is stunned, because it was a multiple summon of 2 higher-level monsters. Going back a bit, Task says it's time to see just how far Wild's Beast Encyclopedia skill can go. The kid says the skill can copy an opponent's form and stats, so he asks if 2 monsters would sort of combine, if Task gets summoned while he's transformed. Wild says he's never tried that and asks why. Yuki says he can't summon the Foxman's true form with the mana he has, and that maybe it'll work if Task is already transformed. The protagonist's idea is to be able to summon any monster through his new master. The man says it's worth testing. Then the hero brings up making a contract, and his friend agrees. With a totally unhinged look, Wild says he's going to show everything he's got. Back in the present, the man says the plan worked, and comments that those tentacles are seriously strong. Right then, the protagonist uses his magic eye to spot the enemy's weak point. With overwhelming strength, the crabman manages to take down the giant octopus. On the next floor, the hero runs into a bunch of magic traps, so he summons the magic owl and tells it to shoot the magic circles. Sometime later, they're already on the 7th floor, known as the Poison Swamp. Using his magic eye, Yuki starts analyzing which path is best. In the background, Doga notices the kid's pace is faster than a whole party's. Suddenly, the hero senses something off and tells the guard to be careful. But the man gets attacked by a snake, though he manages to block it in time. Yuki quickly summons his special snake to deal with it. It heals the man's arm in a second. Seeing he got protected again, Doga starts crying, thinking this is what it means to be human. Then the man suddenly starts laughing like crazy, which freaks the kid out. Taking off his mask, the guard admits his judgment is pretty bad compared to the captain's. Smiling, he says the kid is an incredible adventurer, and that the 2 of them really should be able to clear the dungeon in a week. But the hero argues the plan is to clear everything today. Confused, the man says he thought the kid's outfit was just for scouting, but the kid explains it's not. Then Doga says it's not rare for adventurers to reach the last floor. He reveals the real problem is the boss because nobody has ever beaten it. His expression changes and he asks if the kid seriously thinks he can finish it all in a single day. Yuki says yes because he's already figured out the strategy. He explains he already ran a practical combat simulation against the real monster. Not long after, they reach the boss room, and it's a giant spider. The hero gets ready to start the fight. It's explained that the spider can use its 8 threads to control other monsters. It controls 4 monsters from each floor at the same time. Right then, a bunch of monsters rush the protagonist. Yuki quickly summons the owl to dodge the attacks. Without hesitating, he dismisses the owl and starts falling straight toward the monsters. Then he summons the giant crab to smash a bunch of monsters into the ground. But more monsters keep showing up, and the guard starts panicking. Calmly, Yuki dismisses the crab and summons the Shadow Claw. So far, everything is going exactly to plan. The kid had trained with Task before the mission, because the Foxman could transform into the giant spider to simulate the fight. In the simulation, his master explains the spider can only manipulate unconscious creatures. With that in mind, the hero plans to use the snake to cancel out the paralysis on the controlled monsters. But Wild explains the kid can only seal their movements temporarily, and asks if he plans to attack through that opening. Yuki answers that he's got an even better idea. Back in the present, he says monsters that move on instinct only recognize strength. Determined, the hero charges in with his sword, saying he needs to control them. Then he watches the spider's web of threads to find the right spot. At that moment, the spider pulls several giant octopuses into its army. Using his skill, the protagonist summons the Antinomy snake to neutralize the crushing tentacles paralysis. The snake follows the order immediately, which makes the spider furious. Thinking ahead, Yuki says the boss won't be able to handle it if all 4 giant monsters move at the same time. Right then, several tentacles grab the spider and slam it hard into the ground. After that, the monsters rush the hero, something he was already expecting. Yuki summons the giant crab to protect himself. On top of that, he uses the monster like a platform to jump from. Sword in hand, the hero cuts the spider's threads and finishes the mission. Without a single scratch, he tells the guard the job's done. The guy gets nervous when he realizes the kid can even control monsters that are supposed to be his enemies. All excited, the boy walks up to the guard and asks if he passed. Smiling, the man says the kid's gonna rank up fast because he's strong enough to clear a bunch of dungeons. Pumped, the hero asks if he'll be allowed to do solo clears. The man says yes, but he explains he'll be picking the best dungeons for the kid to raise his rank over these last 6 days. Hearing that, the protagonist realizes his strategies basically just made things harder for himself. 6 days go by and now Yuki is finally heading to his last dungeon. The guard explains that this time it's not a clear, it's a joint investigation mission. He says there's someone really special in that dungeon, known as a named. Curious, the protagonist says he's never heard of that kind of monster. The man explains it's a technical term like karat, the one the kid fought the other day. Every species has individual variation, but sometimes a monster shows up that goes way beyond those limits and becomes something special. When an adventurer runs into a monster like that, they give it a nickname to make it easier to identify. Then Task explains he can't copy or imitate abilities from that kind of monster. Yuki remembers when Makina explained the 3 types of abilities. The first type comes from your job, the second from your species, and the third from the individual. Wild then says he's also a named monster, since his ability is one of a kind. The protagonist asks if named monsters can reach Demon King level. The guard says it's happened before, and that's exactly why investigations matter. He explains that investigations require coordination with other groups. When one of the team members sees the protagonist, they recognize him as the adventurer who's been clearing a ton of dungeons. The girl asks how he can do that alone when he's a monster tamer. A bunch of adventurers start talking about the kid like he's not even standing right there listening. A little awkwardly, the guard says unique adventurers get that kind of attention and all sorts of titles. Then the group starts recognizing the guard standing next to the kid. Looking down, Dugo says all he really does is keep order among the adventurers. Suddenly a bunch of monstrous trees start attacking the group. The hero rushes in and saves everyone with his sword and his pet. While they fight, the guard heals one of the members. Using his magic eye, the protagonist tells all the adventurers to join the attack, and they do. Not long after, the trees are completely destroyed. Tired, Yuki says there are still a lot of monsters left in the dungeon. Dogo explains it's a C-rank dungeon, but the access is terrible because it was abandoned. He says only adventurers like the protagonist bother clearing places like this. Suddenly, the hero picks something up with his magic eye. He's found the investigation target. It's a super cute kind of magical rabbit. One of the adventurers recklessly sprints in to attack it. Noticing the movement, the Pokemon uses an ability called Total Chaos Labyrinth. In an instant, walls start popping up out of nowhere. The ability basically rebuilds the entire dungeon. Even with rocks falling, the 2 adventurers keep charging toward the monster. Then the ground breaks apart. The hero tells the guard he's going to help them. Dogo throws him a device and tells the kid to use it if he needs to. With the device in hand, the hero climbs down to where the adventurers fell. Looking closely, Yuki spots where the 2 of them are. They're trapped, cornered by a giant monster. The monster seems intelligent and says someone was chasing its subordinate. Then it points at the 2 adventurers and at the protagonist. The monster named Lord Xeris announces he's going to erase all 3 of them right now. Nervous, the protagonist can tell from the mana level that this is the boss, and he starts wondering why the boss is on such a shallow floor. Radiating a terrifying aura, Xeris gets ready to attack the ones who wrecked his dungeon. He uses an attack called Rupture Root Piercing Grudge. The hero quickly summons the giant crab to jump in front of the attack. Seeing that, the monster is impressed that one of them can actually fight. Task says that hit hurt, and he won't be able to block them forever. The hero tosses the device to one of the adventurers and tells both of them to stay in the back. Yuki can't see the monster's abilities, so he realizes the guy is way stronger than they told him. Right then, the monster walks up, saying the group is powerless. Worried, the main character tells everyone to be careful, because that ability attacks with roots buried underground. But the blue Pokemon uses its move too. The 2 attacks end up combining, and they trap the group inside this kind of dome. After the attack, the monster smiles at his pet Carbuncle, and says it's good that he's safe, but the moment gets cut off by the owl, along with an ice attack that ends up doing nothing. As he gets out of the dome, the hero realizes sneak attacks don't work either. Seeing him, the monster asks where those 2 adventurers are. Turns out the protagonist managed to send the adventurers far away, since he couldn't summon Q. Using his ability, Yuki says he just needs to beat the boss to end this. The named one says humans are smart, even if they're weak. Furious, the monster says the kid is also really good at getting on people's nerves. Then he tells his pet to use the labyrinth skill, along with his piercing grudge. The monster quickly hurls this spiky ball at the hero, who barely dodges. Seeing that, the big guy says the kid can't block with that summon from before. The Pokemon fires a bunch of spiky balls at the boy, but he keeps dodging. Thinking it over, the protagonist realizes he'll wear himself out fast if he keeps this up. From far away, Wild in owl form says he'll back his friend up with magic. On the ground, the hero readies his sword. Meanwhile, the named one argues the kid can't block this attack no matter what he summons. Yuki answers that he's not going to block, he's going on the offensive. Then he summons Task in maid form. The Foxman throws a heavy punch into one of the spiky balls, smashing it to pieces. A little awkwardly, he says he's not into the maid outfit, but he'll obey his master. The hero chose that form because undead maids don't get tired. Then Wild grabs several stacked spiky balls and says he's going to return the favor. Like it's nothing, he hurls those huge balls straight at the monster. The hit is strong enough to mess the boss up and drop him to his knees. Worried, the blue rabbit tells his lord to fall back. Furious, Saras tells him to shut up and declares he'll wipe them all out at once. But his pet argues that would damage the lord's body, which they need to rebuild the place. Hearing that, the monster asks what's so bad about the dungeon collapsing. When he hears dungeon collapse, the hero instantly thinks of his orphanage. It's explained that the first country to discover a dungeon was on top of the world. The first dungeon collapse happened there too, and as a result, that country vanished off the map. The adventurer job was created to prevent tragedies like that, and the guild exists to support them. But even so, collapses still haunt the world, just like they haunted the protagonist's life. Back in the present, the Pokemon tries to warn his boss that using it non-stop in such a short time is dangerous. He says the Lord could lose control of the dungeon. Annoyed, Xeris asks if his pet is making fun of him. He asks what the little thing is doing, thinking his Lord would lose to some mere human. While crushing Carbuncle, The master says the little monster's arbability was useful, but either way he doesn't need him anymore. Without hesitating, the boss says he only needs his partner's ability. Cruelly, the boss uses a skill called invasive root to absorb carbuncle. Before long, he completely assimilates the blue rabbit. Then the monster quickly launches a massive boulder at the boy. Without thinking, Wild jumps in front to stop it, but the boss uses piercing grudge to hit him from inside the rock. Luckily, the foxman doesn't feel any pain, since he's undead. Sword in hand, the hero says he's going to attack, and he needs his help. But Task warns that the monster needs to go down fast because this dungeon is insanely dangerous. When the name sees the kid coming in, he stomps with his huge foot and cracks the ground. As he's falling through the air, the protagonist calls for the foxman to help him. Wild quickly saves him in owl form. That's when the boss loses it, because he can never land a hit on the protagonist. Desperate, he destroys the upper floors to make everything collapse onto his target. Using his root powers, the Lord pulls all the floors together like one giant weapon. Fuming, he goes in for the final attack. At that moment, the guard shows up calling for Yuki. The hero moves in to touch him. Then the monster smashes his new weapon into the ground with everything it's got. Seeing the kid vanish, the boss freaks out and demands to know where he went. Meanwhile, the protagonist is already somewhere else, relieved he managed to get away. Duga says he heard from the two adventurers that the boss showed up on a shallow floor. Yuki says that's not the real issue, and that they're dealing with a dungeon collapse crisis. The guard says he wants to deal with it ASAP, but it's going to take a long time. He explains that dungeon collapses are still basically in the research stage, and all they really know is that they're more likely to happen in dungeons that are being actively cleared. They explain that when it happens, the dungeon and the surrounding area cave in too, so it's a disaster with no witnesses. The hero says he saw that chaotic dungeon himself, and it didn't look like a lie or a bluff. Dunga agrees but says all the S-rank adventurers are busy right now, and it'll take time to call them back. Hearing that, the kid says the only option is to clear it with whoever's available for now. But the guard explains that most adventurers these days work for money, and people like the kid are rare. Nervous, the hero asks what they're supposed to do. The man says they should report to the guild first and issue evacuation orders for the surrounding areas. Looking down, the protagonist says he'll go to the guild. The guard says he's heading to the dungeon the captain is clearing. He tells the kid not to do anything reckless, and says that this time they might not be able to stop it if something happens. With a serious look, the kid just nods. Sometime later, Yuki starts thinking about what he should do. He knows trying to handle everything alone would be reckless. But he says dungeon collapses are something humans know about, yet both Xeris and Task seem to know the reason behind them. So he decides to go to the Demon King to learn more about dungeon collapses. Using his skill, he asks to learn more about how dungeons work, and about monsters. The vampire says he'll explain, since it'd be a problem if the kid walked into a dungeon that's about to collapse. He says the ways it leads up to a collapse can vary, but the trigger is always the same. A collapse happens when the dungeon boss can't control the dungeon anymore. He says a dungeon is a space that isn't supposed to exist naturally, and keeping it going takes a huge amount of mana. To protect the monsters inside, the boss burns through their own life. That's why bosses try every possible method to keep their dungeons going. But the vampire says some of them fail and end up stretching the space beyond what they can handle. And there's also the chance a boss dumps in too much mana and creates a dungeon that can't be sustained. He says the collapse happens when that balance breaks. Curious, the hero asks if the aftershocks show up in his world too, like they did in that disaster. The vampire says yes, and that's why they have to tune dungeons to the right balance if they want them to survive. Using Liber as an example, he says Xeris rebuilt his dungeon multiple times in a short span, which ended up creating massive strain. Straight up, the demon says the monster is basically destined to self-destruct, so the kid shouldn't do anything. But the protagonist disagrees, saying a lot of people could get dragged into this. Liber argues it's the same for monsters too, and that a lot of them will be in danger if the group loses the kid. Then the vampire flings the kid away with magic. Walking closer, he says he's not going to kill him. He's just going to wear him down completely. Using his skill, Yuki can see the Demon King's mana pressure rising, while the system spits out a bunch of danger alerts. Worn out, the hero thinks not even Machina's wind magic test was as intense as that casual wave of a hand. The demon says the kid isn't the type to give up easily, so he's going to crush him completely. The vampire quickly fires a wind spell at the kid, and he manages to dodge. As he tries to run, the hero realizes how awful it is, fighting someone who knows all your tricks. All imposing, the vampire stomps the ground and shatters everything around him. Nervous, the protagonist asks what kind of stats the Demon King must even have. Yuki asks if it's really okay to wreck his own dungeon like this, but Liber clearly doesn't care. He says it's fine if it's for the kid's sake. Seeing that kind of power, the hero realizes he can't take this guy head on. As he gets ready for another attack, the demon says he can see in the kid's eyes that he's made up his mind about something. Panicking, the hero backs off to create some distance, but the vampire teleports right in front of him and says it's pointless. With one hit, he knocks his pupil to the ground. Disappointed, the protagonist says he really thought he'd gotten super strong. Surprisingly, the vampire admits the hero is strong enough now, and that he'd bet his own survival on him. Still, he says he doesn't believe the kid can stop a dungeon collapse by himself. He explains he won't let the boy jump into a fight where he's guaranteed to lose. Yuki gets back up and says he refuses to be too late again, and that he'll bet his own life on it. He quickly crouches, ready to strike with his sword. Using his brains, the monster realizes it's a bluff, and that the brat is about to hit him with some pre-charged spell. Summoning a magic circle, the man says he can block any spell without breaking a sweat. But then the hero calls for Elvina, and she casts a spell to vanish. Just like that, the two of them disappear using teleportation magic. Not looking worried at all, the vampire just says the kid can't run from a demon king. Somewhere else in the world, the protagonist thanks the maid for saving him. The zombie says she figured the brat wanted a different spell when he contacted her telepathically. Trying to smooth things over, she suggests he should apologize to the demon king. Changing the subject, the protagonist asks where they are, and Elvina says they're probably one floor above Liber. With that in mind, the hero says they need to find an exit. But then an announcement goes out to every floor. It's the demon king, ordering everyone to capture the adventurer Yuki by any means necessary and bring him back alive. Hearing that, the maid asks what her young master just did. Yuki just says he always knew this moment would come. Determined, he says he's going to fight in this dungeon. A little while later, a giant monster shows up to face him. After trading a few blows, the hero manages to take it down, but says he's already exhausted from just one enemy. He asks if the zombie's mana has recovered, but she says she doesn't have enough to use the jump spell again. Checking his phone, the boy sees they need to find a safe zone on this floor as fast as possible. Then he asks Elvina if she's really okay with disobeying Liber's orders. Elvina says normal monsters can't resist her commands once a contract is formed. Hearing that, Yuki asks if Demon King class monsters, like Task, can resist. Elvina says those people are exceptions, and adds that she never planned to take him back in the first place. Surprised, the hero asks why, and she says it's because he can stop a dungeon collapse. She says she heard about how he cleared a dungeon just to bring it back to life. Putting her hands on his face, Elvina says Lord Liber is worrying way too much. Yuki says he didn't think she trusted him that much. Suddenly the butler shows up and cuts their conversation short. He praises the fact that the brat switched into combat mode so fast. Then the old man charges in, saying that alone won't be enough to overcome a dungeon collapse. Vint argues that what's going to be demanded of the hero won't be the kind of win where he can just find an opening. With a heavy strike, he disarms his pupil, saying the kid needs a totally overwhelming victory. The butler keeps attacking, and the protagonist manages to block, but the old man still throws him back like it's nothing. He says the victory has to be perfect. There can't be a single flaw. Desperate, the hero uses his blood ability, but his opponent does the same. So the kid ends up getting grazed. Meanwhile, Elvina uses her super strength to lift a massive boulder. She hurls it at the butler. With one swing, the old man smashes it, and still knocks the hero flying. On the ground, the protagonist realizes his style didn't cancel out the attack. With a serious look, the man walks up, saying the kid's strength is still incomplete. Hurt, Yuki wonders what he can even do, since Elvina is injured. Sword in hand, the butler prepares the finishing blow. And in a slick move, he tricks the kid and drives the sword into a rock. Vint explains that Liber's orders are to bring him back alive, and that for now he's going to give the kid some training so he doesn't accidentally kill him. With this sad, abandoned puppy look on his face, the hero realizes the two of them came to help him instead of capturing him. The butler says Lord Liber let them choose their own methods, which means the vampire trusts each of their judgment. It turns out there are still monsters who don't trust humans at all. Those monsters have been kept under control for a while by the friends the protagonist has made. Standing tall, Vince says the kid needs to grow up fast for the sake of this dungeon. Determined, the boy asks if Elvina can stand. She tells the brat to wait until her arm gets fixed. Yuki says he's ready for this training that's basically flirting with death. The butler says that's a good mindset, but he adds that if the kid can't handle the training, he'll be taken to Lord Liber. So the hero asks what he needs to do. With a scary look, the butler says the kid needs to level up. He has to keep going until he can use multiple summons at the same time. Confused, the protagonist says he can only level up in other dungeons. The butler says he's right when it comes to raw stats, but skills are different. Battle experience can strengthen them. Vint explains the goal is to raise the level of the hero's summoning skill. To make that happen, the kid has to push that skill to its absolute limit. Then the man reveals he brought a bunch of monsters from the dungeon to help with the training. The monsters show gratitude to the boy for bringing all of them back to life, and May is there too, helping with the monsters' physical and mental recovery. The old man says this is the maximum amount of mana they can use for the kid's training. Then he summons Machina, who makes it clear she hates taking orders from the old man and is only doing this for the boy. She says she'll lend him one of her rarest reference books. After that, the hero gets teleported to a training space, like last time. Vint explains that 3 hours in the real world equals 3 days inside that training space. The butler says they don't have much time. Smiling, the protagonist says that's exactly what he needed. Gripping his sword, he says he's going to give it everything he's got. He rushes straight at the monsters for a head-on fight. While he's fighting, he remembers how he used to hate all monsters because of everything that happened at the orphanage. But he admits everything changed after he made the contract with Liber and got saved by Elvina and all that. Suddenly, the hero lands a solid punch on one of the monsters. He keeps training, thinking about how he was just an F rank who now wants to stop the dungeon from collapsing. At one point, the protagonist summons the little bat to use its skill and fires it at the monsters. Sometime later, the head maid tells one of the monsters she might not be able to heal him completely this time. Vin says the kid has fully mastered that skill and has also improved as a swordsman. Then the old man says he'll have to start taking the fight a bit more seriously. With that, the butler charges at the kid. In that moment, the hero thinks to himself that he wants to protect both humans and monsters. With unshakable confidence, he says he needs to get even stronger and he can't stop in a place like this. After a while, the protagonist goes back to Lord Liber. The Demon King asks if the kid got scared of death, saying that doesn't suit him at all. Then Yuki says he came to make a deal. The boy says that back then he said he'd use monsters for humanity's sake. But now the swordsman reveals he wants to protect both monsters and humans. He steps forward and suggests redoing the contract with more equal terms. He says he won't throw his life away and he'll protect both humans and monsters. Hearing that, the man starts laughing mockingly. Furious, he says the kid is just a spoiled brat trying to get his own selfish wish, just like back then. Burning with rage, the Demon King warns that the protagonist will lose everything if he keeps going like this. But the boy refuses and says he won't let that happen. Without any fear, Yuki walks up to the Demon King and asks him to use him. He says he's going to use him to clear out the dungeon collapse. And this time, the boy says he's going to use the vampire to the absolute limit. Reaching out his hand, he says the two of them will protect whatever they want to protect, and that this will be their new deal. After hearing that, Liber thinks this is the same way he used to threaten humans back then. As he stands up, the man says it's interesting being treated like this, and remarks that the kid really has grown up. To everyone's surprise, the Demon King takes the hero's hand to seal the agreement. Smiling, he says the young guy must have a solid plan, because failing isn't an option. Confident, Yuki just says he's got a plan, and he'll show them how to use a Demon King properly.